everyone, I'm Matt, and welcome to the Good Trouble Show. The existence of UAPs, otherwise known as UFOs, continues to be a concern for Congress. UAPs are also a concern for the Pentagon and the Central Intelligence Agency, who are both working feverishly to hide the existence of UAPs and the associated special access programs from lawmakers and the public. Today, we have Dr. Bob McGuire. First time here. I'm very excited. I've been a fan of his for quite some time. He's, of course, otherwise known as Science Bob, to discuss his history with the topic and the latest developments. But first, please hit the subscribe and thumbs up button on YouTube. You can also find us on Twitter at Good Trouble Show and on all other social media platforms at The Good Trouble Show. We always appreciate a comment, share, like, give a thumbs up, and subscribe. All that good stuff really helps us out. You can also find us on your favorite podcasting platforms. Just search for The Good Trouble Show. You can also become a supporter of The Good Trouble Show by going to www.patreon.com/The Good Trouble Show. And for the price of a coffee, you can support our work. Finally, on YouTube, super chats are open and are a great way to show your financial appreciation for our work. I want to thank our financial supporters on Patreon and YouTube, our chat moderators who volunteer their time to keep the chat rooms all sane, and everyone who supports our show. Now, our next guest is no stranger to the UAP UFO topic. He has served in the intelligence community, received the Intelligence Community SEAL Medallion for work in service to the nation. He's an entrepreneur and now serves as faculty at different universities. Please welcome Dr. Bob McGuire. Bob, how are you, sir?
Doing great. Very good to be with you, Matt.
I'm glad you're here. I've as I told Dave on Spaced Out Radio was actually the very first podcast show, whatever you want to call it, on the UAP topic that I ever listened to. I remember when I first discovered Spaced Out Radio, I was on a road trip and we were going through Colorado, and I was just binge listening to all of the episodes that I could get my hands on, and of course that's where I came across you. So thanks for joining us. So how did you get the name Science Bob? Because I think that's how most people know you.
Sure. So I had never attended a UFO conference in my life. As I came near the end of my career and grew interested in this field and had some experiences, I went to UFO Con in 2022, January of 2022. And that's where I met Dave Scott. And Dave talked to me, and we got to know each other. We hit it off, and he asked me would I do a science show regularly once a month on Spaced Out Radio. And very first episode, he called me Science Bob, and it's stuck ever since. So you can blame Dave Scott.
I certainly can. Did he have as great a beard back then as he does now?
Oh yeah, it was better. But now he's gone light. He's got a shorter hair and he keeps his beard closely cropped.
Wow. Okay. All right. Well, good for him. So what is the earliest age you ever thought about UAP or UFOs, whatever you like to call them?
So as a kid, I was really, really, really interested in space and astronomy and radio and technical stuff. And so the beginning of my life was pretty weird. So if you don't mind, I'll go over just a bit.
Please. So
I was born in Lebanon, Tennessee in 1954. I'm now 70. And before I was just before I was one, I developed cerebral meningitis. And my heart arrested 3 times. My parents told that I almost surely wouldn't make it, but if I did, I'd be a vegetable. And within a week, I had recovered. So I had cardiac arrest that lasted a minute or so 3 times before I recovered. So you could say I had 3 NDEs before I was 1. And wow. So I recovered completely, though. We moved to Alabama, where my father worked for his parents at a furniture manufacturing plant that they owned. And by the age of 3, my mother had figured out I was a little precocious, and she really knew. One day when I was 3, I walked into where she was visiting with her best friend, drinking coffee and gossiping. I reached up and grabbed a book off the bookshelf and read it to them. And I had never had any training in how to read. I knew how to read, all of a sudden, like miraculously. So a lot of weird stuff like that went on. I would always teach science to all the kids at the playground, and I was just one of those kids. And by the time I was 10 years old, I had become an amateur radio operator, had my own radios. Parts of them I built myself. I built my own telescope from scratch. I helped my next door neighbor, who is now a trained and retired geologist for Exxon, to build the largest fossil collection privately owned in the state of Alabama. So I was very, very precocious by age 10. And so that kind of went on. I, got all sorts of awards when I graduated, and I went off to college, sure that because I had memorized Gray's Anatomy from cover to cover when I was 10 years old and was tested by doctors to make sure it wasn't a fib, I was just sure I was going to be a doctor. So I went off to university, and in the first semester, I got ready to go home for the weekend, left the school, and had an hour and a half of missing time. And after the hour and a half of missing time, I just said, well, I'm sorry I got lost, and didn't tell anybody anything about it. But I just went home and went on. But 2 weeks later, I knew I was not going to be a medical doctor. I changed universities from one to a technical university in my home state, and majored in applied mathematics and engineering. And then after working for a little over a year at Sandia National Laboratories, I got a PhD in applied mathematics at Brown University. So I went from going to be a doctor to make all the family happy to them wondering what happened to me, but I had a successful career. And so then I worked for 27 years for the intelligence community. And then 11 years as on the faculty at Virginia Tech, and then retired.
Wow. Yeah. I don't know what my parents think of where I ended up. I was originally engineering as well, and departed from that. I'm certainly glad I did. I'm curious, this epiphany to change majors and decide you no longer wanted to become a medical doctor, do you think it was related to that missing time experience? And I take it you were driving from college back home. What were the details of that?
It was a 2-hour drive, 2.5-hour drive from the college where I went back to my hometown. And it's mostly rural. At the time, there was a short piece of interstate highway that we could drive on, but mostly was rural 2-lane roads. And I left the interstate highway and went off to someplace in the middle of nowhere. I suddenly woke up with my car parked in the middle of the road at a stop sign, and I had absolutely no idea where I was. So having no idea where I was, it took me a minute to kind of recover where I was. I had to drive ahead a little bit and went into a town, and I realized that I had departed 40 miles from my course, but I knew where I was, and I was able to easily navigate my way home. But I had no idea what had happened. And actually, I mostly forgot about it until later on in life, when I began getting really interested in UFOs for various reasons. I was listening to a Grant Cameron panel, and he began talking about that kind of experience, and click, it suddenly dawned on me that I had missing time, and there was someone with me. So I called the person and said, do you recall this missing time incident we had in 1972 driving home from university back to our hometown? And they went, yes, they remembered it. So I confirmed that it happened with the person who was with me. And we just had no idea how it happened, but there you go. And after that, it was like I was programmed to change schools and majors. I didn't really feel I had a choice. It was just, that was what I was going to do.
So it could have been some kind of download, or who knows? And
So that's that. And now that I understand a lot more about all of this, given the experiences and my studies, I had downloads my entire adult life.
amazing. And no recollection of seeing any kind of object before the missing time or anything of that nature?
Nothing. The first so later on, I recovered these memories of when I would be in the yard with my telescope. I would see stuff in the sky, but it just didn't make that big an impression on me. And I don't have any memory of any interactions, just seeing stuff in the sky. You know, that was the beginning of the space age. And so every kid was cuckoo about what was in the sky, and so was I. And I had a telescope, and I would stay out all hours of the night looking at the sky. And I saw things, but I don't recall anything happening. But later on, I recalled that I had had all sorts of downloads of information that was not formally introduced to me. And it was kind of amazing. I had a nearly photographic memory, and it just was one of those things that I just was, whatever it was determined that I don't do what I did and do what I'm doing now. And it was a good fit for the rest of my life. I had a good career.
Amazing. I'm just curious, is there any history of similar sort of experiences with the rest of your family?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Wow. Amazing. Now, I understand that you once met Chris Bledsoe, and following that, you became a fairly regular experiencer. Tell us a bit about that.
Sure. So as I told you, during the latter stages of my career at Virginia Tech, I began hearing these rumors called rumor intelligence about UFOs and other stuff being talked about across government. So I grew interested, and I started studying the subject. I quickly found out about Richard Dolan and his books on UFOs and the national security state. Given that I was a denizen of the national security state, I read those books from cover to cover and saw him do a 4-part interview with Chris Bledsoe. And after the 4-part interview with Chris Bledsoe, and understand Chris's constant contact and seeming interest in people from the government and the intelligence community, I contacted him. I contacted him through social media and said, Chris, look, I'm a scientist over at Virginia Tech. I've had a long career with the intelligence community. I'm easy to find on Google. And with your permission, I'd like to come visit. So it took him a while, and after a little while, he just out of the blue contacted me. He says, yeah, look, I think we can come over. Let's do it after Christmas. And in the early January, I went over to visit with he and his family. And we had 3 rainy days, and the 4th day it was clear. We went outside. But in the 3 rainy days, Chris did the most amazing memory dump of all the things that had happened to him, all of his weird experiences, who had come to see him, what they had told him. It was pretty amazing. So wow. At the end of that 3 days, after which we became very good friends, we went outside. And because Chris was the one that got up and said, okay, let's go outside. And it was clear, he was pushed. You could just kind of see this look on his face. As soon as we got outside, we looked up at the sky, and this great big 40-foot orb flashed into existence right above the treetops and moved across the sky. And I went, oh my goodness. So Chris says, well, you got to see it. He says, I had asked them for permission, and they came and blinked and got big orbs all over the place. So I knew they were going to welcome you, but I'm glad to see you saw it. So we stayed out for a little bit, wondered if we'd see anything else. And I began noticing these flash-looking things going off in the treetops. So as the flash things went off looking at the treetops, I was a little bit grumpy because I couldn't see them. I could just see the flash happening on the leaves and the pine needles. So I said to myself, I wish they would move up out of those trees into the open where I could see them. And almost immediately, they moved up out of the trees into the open where I could see them. So that was kind of my first inkling that there might have been telepathic communication going on, because I was like, wow. So Ryan Bledsoe, the podcaster Bledsoe Said So lead, came out. That's Chris's son. And as soon as he came out, we had another 40-foot orb appear. And Ryan got the incident with us hooting and hollering on video. And he has that someplace and people can go see it. Anyway, so after that, Ryan ran in to tell everybody inside that we had seen this gigantic orb and everybody was happy. And so Chris and I stayed out there and he was not quite ready to go in. So I kept looking up, but he wasn't looking up much. But I began to see this like purple, smoky looking aura that looked like the wavy surface of a pond right above the treetops. And I'm now told this purple aura stuff is pretty common. I had no idea at the time. So anyway, I watched it and I could see it and I kept saying, am I really seeing this? And it just slowly but surely got a little bit brighter till I was certain I could see it. And in an instant, it just disappeared. And the minute it disappeared, almost to the second, Chris said, okay, they're gone. We can go inside now. So that was my second clear indication telepathic communication was going on. So I went inside, we finished our visit, I went home, and 2 days later, after going home, I began having the hitchhiker. He told me that he did not tell me that it happened almost always. I think he wanted to see if it would happen without it being suggested. So yeah, I began getting these strange things happening. And the weirdest of all, Matt, was I was laying on my bed reading a book one morning and water squirted out of the middle of the air on my legs and on me. And I went, what the heck? We just had this roof fixed. How's it leaking? And so I didn't see a leak anywhere around the roof, no sign of a leak. So I just forgot it and went on. 2 days later, same thing. Water squirted out of the middle of the air, got on the bed and so forth. And I hollered out the other person in the home came to come on, do you see this water? And they told me it was all over the blanket and on my legs, etc. So two or 3 days after that, I heard a squeal at the other side of the home and had water squirt on me. I walked down there and that person had water squirted on them and I could see it on the floor and on their clothes. So I said, okay, time for me to call Chris. So I called Chris and he says, yeah, they got some kind of message for you and they're definitely trying to get your attention. I says, well, Chris, look, I'm convinced, okay, and I know you're going to go out to UFO Con, and I am happy to, with all that evidence, look, I'm not saying you're incapable, but I'm happy to help you put together this PowerPoint slide deck so you can give this talk out at UFO Con. And I did that for 2 weeks, and then he sent them the slide deck, and I flew out there to be there in moral support or whatever, and met all these people that that were experiencers that I just had no experience with myself. And then Chris gave this talk, and I learned a lot about stuff. And since that time, the level of activity just slowly but surely increased. I had orbs in my yard, craft flying under the trees in my backyard. I had this white orb appear in the middle of the living room. And the most stunning orb one is in the front yard on my security camera. And it was 3 orbs moving up and down in a triangle formation. So I reached over and grabbed the controls and put it on a long record. And I went out through the carport and around the corner because I wanted to see if it was bugs being illuminated by the IR LED. Right. So as I ran around the corner and looked at them, I could see the 3 orbs with my eyes, and they were colorful. They were orange, and so they were not being illuminated by the LED because I could see them with my eyes. And as soon as we acknowledged that I had seen them, by me going wow inside, they took off and went straight up. So it just had all sorts of stuff by then. And then my mother passed away, and I was contacted by my girlfriend, who was not my girlfriend at the time, said that she had been listening to me and Dave on the radio, and that she had certain abilities. She didn't know if I believed in that or not. She didn't want anything. It was not for money or anything else, but she had a message for me to come back and talk to her after my mother passed away. So my mother began to fail, and I went over and saw her, and she was on hospice already. And during the period of time between started to decline and she passed away, she saw my deceased relatives in her room almost constantly. So that really grew my curiosity. So she passed away. We had the funeral, all that stuff. And when I got home, I contacted my girlfriend, and she did a reading for me. And man, I got to tell you, it was an ontological shock for a scientist who had not really been exposed to this in any way. She told me things that no one, I mean, 0 people knew besides me and my mother. Wow. Then she told me some things that I didn't know, and I asked my brothers, and they didn't know, but we reached out to friends and relatives, and they confirmed that what I was told my mother said to her. And so at the end of this reading, before she stopped, she says, "This a little woman's walked up to me. I can't make out what she's saying." Says her Southern accent is so thick, I can't understand her. And she said, but she keeps saying this word. She's like almost jumping up and down saying this word. And she says, "I feel foolish, but I said, well, what's the word?" She said, she's saying Tweety. And man, I tell you, I was just blown away. So Tweety was my version at 1 year old of her calling me sweetie. Wow. And it was my grandmother. And then she said, she's got a little poodle in her arms. And I went, wow. My grandmother was a professional breeder of poodles, and she always had her favorite Pierre in her arms. So I just was kind of blown away, and she and I began exploring her experiences and her dreams, quote, dreams and other things. And I recognized these dreams as fragmented memories of contact and abductions and other things. I mean, some of it's pretty horrendous. That the stories, experiences have been through. She's been through all of it. So anyway, that was where it really began. And then we got together, decided to move in together here in Maryland. And when we did, we had paranormal experiences in the house. I think you might be familiar with some of that. And then we got an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, on a security camera that was clearly identifiable as the deceased father of her and her boyfriend's, the deceased father of her child. And it was immediate. We put up other cameras, saw orbs all through the house. Then we put cameras outside and began seeing things in the sky in the north of the house. Then we put another one in the front, so the south of the house, and we just constantly see stuff now. And we're sharing this videos and photos and other things in a public Facebook album that people can go see.
Amazing. Now, you mentioned earlier when you were telling us a bit about this that you saw craft as well early on. What sort of physical things did you see other than the non-corporeal orbs?
Okay, so the craft. Look, so the craft was strange. So coming from the west, I saw a blinking light through the trees while I was out back with my telescope. I have a big Celestron telescope, which I've kept doing the amateur astronomy since I was a kid. Okay, so I was out there, and then I noticed, now wait a minute, that can't be an airplane. Even if it's blinking navigation lights, there's no airplane that flies beneath the canopy of the trees. So it was underneath the trees in my backyard. And I just sat there and looked at it, and it just sat there, blink, blink. And it was just saying, I'm here. And it could not have been an airplane because it was below the treetops. It was like 100 to 150 feet in front of me and below the treetops. And I just sat there and let it blink at me until I decided, okay, well, look, it's cold. I'm going inside. And I went inside, looked out the window, and it was still there. And I just had had no, and it was not long after that where I had this big orb in the living room, which was white and bright. There was no heat coming off of it. I had no biological effects, but the thing was so bright it was hard to look at. It was pinpoint, but extremely bright. And then the other thing was I woke up, and not knowing what woke me up, and I saw a figure in the corner of the room, and the figure walked toward me, and it was a teenage boy. And I went, what in the heck is this? So the teenage boy walked up, looked at me, stared at me, and after it vanished in a flash. So I just went, wow, this stuff is really weird. And after that, the experiences just continued. So seeing the actual craft regularly didn't happen until I got here. And we capture this stuff. We capture orbs and flashes and other things in the sky. And we know how to look at these things now when we capture them and zoom in on them. And you can see that after we zoom in on them, that they are craft. So we record them so we can look at later, and they are clear, structured craft. And they'll have these, and to a scientist like me, it's really obvious kind of what's going on. Is you see this structured craft, and part of it is illuminated, and the other part is in shadow, and it's up in the sky, and it's after midnight. So you're going, whoa, that is so high above the ground that part of it is illuminated by the sun, which is below my horizon, and the other part is in shadow. And then you could see little lights on it as well. It's been crazy seeing this stuff. So it's now like every day we have something, whether it's paranormal inside or oddball outside, we just see stuff all the time. We have objects moved, doors closed, drawers open and closed. It's just one of those things. We don't even pay that much attention now because it doesn't appear to be doing anything malicious.
That was going to be my next question. Have you ever felt any sort of threatening energy or negative energy from any of this?
None whatsoever. So we had little indication at all of what was going on until my girlfriend Lala and I were out on our deck. And we were just sitting in our glider chairs, and she says, hand me the camera. So I handed her my big Canon camera with a big lens on it, and she went click, and we looked at the picture, and in this picture, there was this smoke-looking stuff, and there was no smoke or fog in the air. We looked at smoke-looking stuff, and out of the smoke, you could see 6 feet in front of us, absolutely plain face of a gray alien. Wow. Right in front of us, 6 feet away from us. And she was telepathically contacted the next day and told us they want us to work on soft disclosure. And so I'm doing this kind of thing now.
Amazing.
Talking about it.
Wow. Now tell us a bit about your entry into the intelligence field. And somebody suggested as well, actually, Dave, I think it was Dave Smethurst, who's a fan of yours as well, asked to ask you about going across back in the old U.S.-Russia days, going across to the east side.
Oh, okay. So, well, yeah, I was actually in graduate school. I was not an employee, and I was offered summer employment to work on a committee of scientists to read papers that had been published by scientists behind the Iron Curtain. And our purpose was to try to figure out why would they have done this work. And so we did all this kind of work, and we finally figured out what was going on. So with some of them, and a lot of the professors that were with me were foreign nationals or maybe naturalized citizens. And so they're not going to be getting a security clearance. So I had a security clearance because I worked at Sandia National Lab where I had a Q clearance. And then I worked for summers for the intelligence community while I was in graduate school. And so I had a top secret clearance, top secret and above, and a Q clearance, both. So I was asked to stay behind and told, we've got something we'd like for you to do. And I agreed to do it, probably crazy. But anyway, I was taken to where I could interview actual scientists in an unsafe condition.
In a unsafe condition?
Yeah, it was on the wrong side of the border.
Got it. Okay. Sorry, I'm a little bit a little bit slow today. Okay. So that sounds like that was one heck of an experience.
It was an experience, but anyway, that was it. That was the only kind of that really, truly crazy stuff like that I ever did. I mean, I did work for the government in and out of the country, but nothing crazy like that since I was too young to know any better.
Now, working in and around the intelligence community, did you ever come across, I know obviously there are things you can't speak about, did you ever come across anything UAP related, or did you ever come across other people in the intelligence community at the water cooler talking about UAPs, UFOs?
None of that. So none of the hearing them talk about it, but I twice went out on assignments detailed to Navy vessels. And behind me, there's this background that is depicting the USS Blue Ridge, which is going through a typhoon near Japan. And one was right above our ship, blocked off all the rain from the ship. It was bigger than the ship. And I walked up forward because everybody else on the bridge was just really concentrating on navigating and keeping the ship safe. So, but I was up there hanging out, being a spectator. So because to see the typhoon, so I looked out the front window and I could see a little glow in the sky. I couldn't really make out much detail because it was awful weather. But all of a sudden it got brighter. It looked like the rays of light, and then boom, it took off. And that didn't last more than a second. And so I said, did any of you see any of that? And to a person, they told me, we see nothing, and you didn't either. So I just left it alone. So and then later on, much earlier than that was 2008, much earlier than that, I had reason to be on the USS Hampton, and that's as much as I can tell you about what I was doing. Except while I was there was a time when we went down pretty deep, and we heard a USO on the instruments, and it was really traveling fast.
Wow.
The senior master chief says this has got to be moving faster than the speed of sound, but how can that be in incompressible water? It was pretty amazing.
And sorry if I missed this, if you specified this, what kind of vessel was this? Was this a submarine?
It was a Los Angeles class attack submarine.
Okay, got it. And and it's interesting you mentioned that because Tim Gallaudet, who's been on our show before, retired Rear Admiral, just put out a white paper for the Soul Foundation regarding USOs, unidentified submerged objects. During that experience, was there any further talk or?
Not much. No, I mean, the senior master chief announced it to the captain, and the captain says, "Okay, put it in the book," and that was it. No, there was no more discussion of it whatsoever. It was like they knew better, and right. I could feel the tension. I just left it alone.
Yeah. You knew better than to ask any further questions.
Look, I'm a guest. And what you would call me is a rider. A rider is somebody who has no official duties outside of what they're there for. And so you don't interfere with them while they're operating a vessel, and you don't ask many questions.
That completely makes sense. Now, so in addition to being a scientist and teaching and whatnot and working in the intelligence community, so you've also been an entrepreneur, which I didn't know this about you. And you founded two companies, one of which is Hawkeye 360. And I pulled up their webpage, and it says here, reveal the unknown with Hawkeye 360's radio RF analytics. Use our space-based RF geointelligence and electronic intelligence to better understand the baseline of activity in your environment, quickly identify anomalous behaviors, cue other sources of intelligence, and act with confidence. Our radio frequency geointelligence is unclassified and easy to share with partners for greater impact. This sounds, and I noticed this company that you founded does satellites and whatnot. This sounds like something perfectly tailored to tracking UAP in our atmosphere.
I would think so. So I actually got invited to talk to people at SCU in the June of 2022. Is that right? Yeah, 2022. The last SCU meeting that was held in person in Huntsville, and I talked to some of them, and I believe, pretty sure that they came there to talk to me because they wanted to talk to me about Hawkeye 360 helping the UAP task force. And I had to tell them that I no longer had a security clearance and I couldn't go inside. And you could see the dejected looks on their face. Because I mean, I would have been a great resource since I knew how all the Hawkeye 360 stuff worked. So as a matter of fact, given that what we know now about these RF emissions that seem to happen around some of these UAPs, it could have helped track those. And they may be doing it now, because remember, I never went inside, so I don't know what they're doing. And I really don't have much access to what is going on now because inside of Hawkeye, because the National Reconnaissance Office has adopted the Hawkeye constellation as part of the national constellation. So they will give tasking orders to Hawkeye and it will observe and pass off the data. Hawkeye does not know what it observes, but it observes stuff and it passes it off, in an agreed upon manner. So when in the early days, right before Hawkeye kind of really took off and got interested in the intelligence community, Hawkeye detected the transmissions of the Chinese army as they were building up on the Indian border, about to renew their border dispute. And Hawkeye alerted everyone, and the Indian newspapers put it all over their front page. And I suspect I was not the favorite person in China right about then. But anyway, and Hawkeye is doing a great job. So now I'm a stockholder and I don't work on it every day, but they are going great guns. I cannot believe how fast that company's grown and how well they're doing.
That's fantastic. So it sounds as if their product could be used to track UAP in real time.
So it has the potential, but they're still growing the constellation. So in other words, it doesn't have 7/24 coverage yet, but that's the aim, is they're slowly but surely building up the constellation, and pretty soon it'll have nearly continuous coverage.
And how does this relate? So and this is where I've been a little bit confused. So you've got the NSA, and then you've got the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. How does the NGA relate to space-based intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance assets?
Okay, so most of the data that comes from everything except listening satellites goes to NGA. They take all of that data and make reportable product to send to the Defense Department, the intelligence community, and the president's desk. So they do a lot of coordinating of all sorts of intelligence gathering from technical means. So I would say in those areas, they are the principal consumer of technical intelligence from the orbital and other platforms that operate on behalf of the U.S. government. I can't say a whole lot other than if it's a spy satellite, they have something to do with it. Now, the National Reconnaissance Office constructs all of those spacecraft for all members of the United States government that need that kind of stuff. So NRO is not an agency, it's an office, and its job is to run contracts and put those things together and then maybe operate them on behalf of the consumer of the data in the government. So it's all kind of this well-oiled machine that's been put together over the last many decades. And so it's pretty amazing.
So the NGA is the consumer of that raw data, then they digest it and produce an intelligence product that can be presented to leadership or the military.
I will give you a now publicly known example. NGA put together all sorts of data, which I won't comment on, but their data that they put together, which I won't comment on, is how the United States government, along with other things put together with it, found Osama bin Laden.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Now, going through the website too, and I'm curious if you know these individuals. So, on the board of directors, you have the principal deputy director of national intelligence in the ODNI, who is the actual portfolio holder of AARO. And I didn't put it in my card, but do you know this lady at all? And any idea if why ODNI is avoiding the UAP topic so heavily?
I don't know why, because remember, I was not privy to these covered up secrets while I was in the national intelligence services and operating on their behalf. So I never was privy to any of this stuff. So, but I know most of those big names that are on the Hawkeye board. Look, after they figured out that we were for real and actually knew what we were doing and it was going to be a big deal. I mean, you can go through the list. I mean, General Deptula and former directors of National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, former director of NRO, et cetera. I mean, just the list of people that's on the advisory board and the board of directors, they're unreal. I can't believe the people who are on there now. It's really pretty amazing. So, but look, I was exposed to many of them while I was the chief scientist at the Hume Center at Virginia Tech, because they were on our board of advisors. So they kind of knew me and knew who I was before I retired.
Understood. So back in November, Chris Sharp, Josh Boswell, and we published an article in the Daily Mail that was titled Exclusive: CIA Secret Office has conducted UFO retrieval missions on at least 9 crash sites around the world, whistleblowers reveal. And we pretty much laid out in detail. We spent a very long time putting this together, cross-checking it, but essentially we detailed how the Central Intelligence Agency is the actual portfolio holder of the entire UAP UFO issue, or program, or whatever you want to call it, and that I guess you want to call it a group organization under the Directorate of Science and Technology in the CIA, called the Office of Global Access, which is this very secretive group. We could find very little about it. How they actually ran the crash recovery operations, that essentially NGA has a system in place that is able to track UAP in real time all over the world, that they can detect when one of these craft go down. And then when they do, the Office of Global Access tasks the recovery operation. They either spin it off to JSOC, or Joint Special Operations Command, or they spin it off to a private aerospace contractor to recover the vehicle. Do these things ring a bell? Do they resonate? Does this sound like something that, in your experience, adds up?
So I'm not surprised. So I know a little something about OGA from other work I did. I won't be able to comment on it, but none of the work I know about or was involved with, even to the level I was, had anything to do with UAP or crash retrievals. But it does not surprise me.
It does,
because
okay.
The operations that I knew about, the ones I knew about, did involve operations overseas to do things that I would later know about. So because I would need to use some of it. So I can't comment much about it because that stuff is, wow, is that touchy, and I'm just not going to go there.
It was interesting when I began digging around on the OGA issue. My contacts in DC, who have usually been pretty forthcoming. As I always say, nothing ever classified is ever given to me, nor do I ever ask for anything classified. But as soon as I mentioned OGA, people shut up. They would,
including me. You won't get me to say much about anything they do.
Now, one of the things that we also discovered is under OGA.
But let me add one thing.
Sure.
It's not a great big revelation that they work overseas, because that's the CIA's charter, is to gather intelligence on behalf of the government overseas. They don't have a portfolio of operations to do inside the United States. If they do anything at all, they have to be accompanied by those who do.
Well, and that kind of leads me to my next question. So one of the things that we looked into, and I'd have to go back and read the article, but I think we purposely left that out. One of the things that we were told by multiple sources was that OGA has a sort of rogue group, and I would also point out too that Douglas Wolfe, who was instrumental in founding OGA, is actually part of or on the board of directors for your old company there. That there is a rogue group of JSOC operators passed under OGA, and that these are the individuals, or this group of Tier 1 operators or former Tier 1 operators. This is actually the group that has engaged in wet works, other kinetic activities, harassment of whistleblowers, etc. Of course, if you can't say anything, I completely understand, and I would imagine that this wouldn't be something you would have visibility into.
Well,
but would that surprise you?
It's easy. It's easy because I don't know enough to tell you anything. I literally have no direct or indirect knowledge. And that they were involved in crash retrievals, I learned about it from you and Chris.
Oh, wow. Okay. But would that surprise you that there is a rogue element running around that is sort of the hammer keeping people quiet on this?
The plausible deniability for people that work for the United States government is often accomplished by having outside entities do things for them. This is a standard operating procedure, so it does not surprise me. But I don't know that they're doing that. I'm just telling you, it does not surprise me that that type of using other entities to do things for them, so it does not directly involve U.S. government officers, it does not surprise me at all.
So using, say, like a Blackwater or a private security contractor to perform those sorts of things? Does not
surprise me at all. I mean, they did that constantly in Afghanistan and Iraq. So, and that's well known. I mean, you can go read all sorts of news stories about them operating as security for State Department and other people in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's just, yes, that is a thing they do. I don't know whether I'd call them rogue or not, but there you go.
And the purpose, it sounds like, would be to have a sort of wider berth to maybe do things that the government wouldn't necessarily want their fingerprints on. They can offload it to a contractor.
They give them, it's supposed they were given a mission. This is what you're supposed to accomplish. And the mission is accomplished and the government is handed something. They don't want to know any details of what it took to get it.
Understood. Now, you, having worked in this sort of intelligence world, you understand probably better than anyone how all of this works. Now, a lot of folks will say, you know what, there is no way these special access programs could be kept quiet for so long, it would leak out, etc. Is that a fair argument, or could something like that within the security infrastructure in the CIA or just the intelligence community and Pentagon in general, could they keep it secret for 80 plus years?
So let me tell you, people still do not quite understand how valuable David Grusch is. He identified the process, and he identified it carefully, and he identified how these private companies are funded to do this work, and when it happened, and the government wanted them to work on stuff, they refused to do it because they said, look, you're going to give us stuff, we're going to figure out stuff, and then you're going to take it away and give it to some other company. So they worked out way back when, in the legacy days, that the companies would actually own the property and the government would have access to anything they developed, but the company itself would benefit from what they learned. So this is not unusual, and these kinds of special access programs, especially those that a magic wand is waved on them, and you don't have to tell anybody except a handful of people, what is going, not regular oversight is done on those programs, and it's just, and so the people do not understand how compartmentation works. So you take a problem and you carve it up into jigsaw pieces. One entity will be given one piece, and they won't even know what the other puzzle pieces are. And so none of them are allowed to confer, because the way the security works for that entity that's doing that work on that one puzzle piece, they can communicate nowhere at all except in approved spaces where that work can be done. You have to turn your mind off and turn your mouth off when you leave the door. So nothing that's in there can you take out of there. And so they will, the people in the next room could have non-human intelligences in there, and the people over here could be working on some kind of energy source, and they not even know what each other's doing, because that's the way it works. But I'm telling you, it's pretty clear to me that the way this has been done, it's been broken up into pieces and spread all over government. And it's just nearly impossible to figure it out. And to the extent that Grusch was able to figure it out, I think it's an amazing accomplishment. We can thank UAPTF's leadership for telling him to do it.
Yeah, we owe David Grusch a debt of gratitude, what he has done for this country, and especially Jay Stratton, all of these folks, yeah. Lou and others that have decided that the secrecy behind this is just uncalled for in terms of at least leveling with the public that we are in the middle of the food chain, and we are dealing with a non-human intelligence. Yeah, it's
I keep coming back to this question, the same as you, and it really has to be a bucket full of bad things that they just don't want to tell us. I just never seen anything like this. I would be one of those who a few years ago would have told you this kind of secrecy is impossible, and now I know it isn't, because Grusch told us how they did it.
And everything that he stated, or that you heard him talk about in terms of how they did it, in your experience working in intelligence and whatnot, all of that tracks, all of that makes sense.
Yeah. If I'll give you an example, I was in a program of the type he was talking about, not about UFOs, but about something else that I will never speak of. But the way it worked was, I could not say outside of the space where the work was allowed to be done what the name of the program was, what the classification level of the program was, who was my government manager, who was the contractor I was working for, where the money came from. And you signed away basically the entire Bill of Rights, and your obligation to keep those details secret is lifelong.
So if you were, and where I'm going with this question, you see people on Twitter all the time going, screw the NDA, these guys just need to tell the public what they know. So if Bob McGuire right now spilled everything you knew about the SAPs you were on, what would happen to you if you did that?
I'd be arrested within hours and put on trial. And I would be kept in confinement until I went to trial, and nobody would be able to attend my trial. So I'm just not going to do it, because it's not worth that risk. And people are just nuts if they think people are going to subject themselves to that. They're not going to, and neither would I. I will not tell you what I did for the government on any operation I was ever involved with. I'm just telling you, I won't.
And you would
lose. I don't want to be subjected to that.
And you would lose your retirement as well, your pension?
No, I wouldn't. But I wouldn't, because most of mine is in private funds.
Got it.
So the answer is not. But I mean, look, they could lay a fine on me for violating stuff that would take much of my valuables.
And these NDAs, these are for life, correct?
Mine definitely were, and I'm assuming theirs are too.
So
lifelong requirements.
So it's
just to the point now where I cannot get on an airplane and go to outside of the United States without informing all of them where I'm going and where I will be every hour of the day while I'm outside the United States.
To this day, you still have to do
To
that.
this day, even though I no longer have a security clearance, I'm still required, and I would do it because I do not want to get in trouble.
I don't blame you. So the folks that say to Grusch and Lou and whatnot, just dump it all, don't worry about your NDA, these folks are nuts.
They are indeed.
Yeah, absolutely.
They're just nobody would subject themselves to what would come if they did that. Nobody.
Yeah, it's a completely. I've never understood how people can think that that would be the right thing to do. No one that is involved in any of this that has served our country wants to ever hurt our country, and sure as hell don't want to go to Leavenworth and have all of the other things. Now, so moving on. So speaking of well, I got a little sidetracked there. So let's move on to the AARO report. Now, so here's the title page of it. And oh wait, sorry, no, that's not it. The Department of Defense All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office report on the historical record of U.S. government involvement with unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP. So this thing came out, and the current director, Tim Phillips, said, backing up a bit. It says in the report, quote, AARO has found no verifiable evidence that any UAP sighting has represented extraterrestrial activity, said Director Tim Phillips. This is during an interview. AARO has found no verifiable evidence that the U.S. government or private industry has ever had access to extraterrestrial technology. AARO has found no indications that any information was illegally or inappropriately withheld from Congress. Is this just bunk?
I don't believe a single word of that paragraph. But remember, that's belief. What we need to go forward is real evidence, but I don't believe a word in that. And the reason is they put so many misinformed, deviating information from reality, crappy references. Sean Kirkpatrick was so puffed up about science, and he says all these things he's done, and and there's no science of any type in that document. They talk about the data that they've looked at to make classifications, and they tell you nothing about what the ground truth is that they decided whether it was anomalous or not, or how they arrived at such conclusions. They don't tell you about the data. They're not going to show you any data. They're just going to throw it over the transom and hope it'll be like the Condon report after talking to their pet reporters and hope it'll all blow away. I got to tell you, I think too much toothpaste has gotten out of the tube. That's my hope anyway.
I couldn't agree more. There's no way that
the references. The first thing I looked for was the references, and I was appalled. They had a fandom wiki page as the third reference in the document, and then there was absolutely no description of the data or the methods for collection. And then you had one person after another winding up with the most stunning revelation I've heard in years from Danny Sheehan about his having gone in and talked to them and told them exactly where to go and find incontrovertible evidence of a crash retrieval program in Project Blue Book classified data, and the name of the person who was working inside the archival system, the Library of Congress, who Danny Sheehan got the information from. And I know this person. I know Marcia Smith. So when Jeff Perry was this high school teacher in England, and he taught physics, and he had these kids that they used radios to listen to satellites because it was, the age of Sputnik and all that other stuff. And they listened to these spacecraft go overhead, beep, beep, beeping on their radios. And using the radios, they figured out by backing the orbits up, by doing backwards in time orbital mechanics, where the launch site was. And that's how the world became aware of the Placette launch site before the U.S. government did. A high school teacher and history. And so I brought Jeff over and I got him in. He gave this talk in Friedman Auditorium at NSA and other places I can't talk about. And we went downtown. I took him downtown. We met Marcia Smith, and he had been interacting with her for years. And now she's no longer at Library of Congress. She's someplace else. But she could absolutely corroborate that what I'm telling you is true. And I know her well enough to know she wouldn't lie. And Danny Sheehan knows her. And so he has laid all of his cards on the table of where the proof is for what he told them.
And do you think that AARO, in particular, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, do you think that he didn't look, didn't want to look? Was he not supposed to look? What is your feeling about that?
I don't believe he got out of his desk. So my personal belief is he didn't go look. That's my personal belief without evidence. Just from the nature of what was going on there, I think they threw up their open for business shingle on the door, and they would happily talk to anybody who came in the door. I don't believe they got up and went and looked anywhere. And to the extent they looked some places, they sent somebody else, not them, who probably was tasked with not finding what they were looking for.
That doesn't surprise me at all. And Tim Phillips actually spoke about this, but this was another quote in defense.gov. Quote, AARO, as designed by Congress, had unprecedented access to classified programs, Phillips said. Nobody blocked where we could go or the questions we asked. Nobody in the government influenced the findings in the report. As a career intelligence officer, and again, this is Tim Phillips speaking, I am just amazed at the access we had to some of our nation's most sensitive programs. Nobody said no. But I would guess people aren't going to say no if they're looking in the places that nothing is there.
Well, especially since they delayed it for so long, they had time to move stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's maddening. One of the things that we spoke about in a previous show is that so Sean Kirkpatrick and his arrogance has just gone off tons and tons of times about how AARO has all of this authority and all of this stuff. But what I found out is they actually did not have a whole lot of authority. There's a thing called 1811 or special agent authority. So they've got OSI agents, they've got FBI liaisons working at AARO, but they do not have 1811 authority. So they cannot go and subpoena people. They cannot arrest anybody. They have no investigative power. They have no teeth to back that up. So
they can't refer to people to the Department of Justice for prosecution for lying. Yeah, it's a completely toothless organization. It is Condon 2.0.
It totally is. So do you think that so like in the beginning, I was trying to be optimistic about Kirkpatrick, thinking, okay, maybe things would turn out totally different than everyone was predicting. Were you surprised in the end as far as how it turned out with Kirkpatrick?
No, because as soon as the Disclosure Act was killed, I knew that report was going to be a nothing burger because they would believe they had won.
Yeah, that's I'm still like flabbergasted by it. And the other thing that really flabbergasts me as well is, so prior to this report, you had this kind of hack journalist. He's really a video editor, Stephen Greenstreet, that works out of the New York Post, began sort of spinning, along with the other debunkers, this entire narrative that it was essentially a bunch of UFO fanatics that had security clearances, that had worked in the government, that managed to completely hoodwink and fool not only members of Congress, but their staffers into believing this whole UFO stuff. So that kind of garbage coming out of, not Kirkpatrick, out of Greenstreet's mouth, that doesn't surprise me at all. That's, yeah, don't get me started with him. But I was just completely floored that after Kirkpatrick leaves, he essentially goes on this media rehab tour, because if you think about it, David Grusch totally showed Sean Kirkpatrick as being a liar, and in that you couldn't trust the guy. So it's like he goes on this sort of media rehab tour and is parroting the same stuff Stephen Greenstreet was saying. And then he has a whole Scientific American article where it's hyperlinking back to Greenstreet's stuff. Were you surprised as much as I was that him being Kirkpatrick, ended up spouting the same kind of bullshit about Congress being fooled by all these folks? Were you surprised at all about that? Not after, but the fact that he would go in Scientific American, that and Scientific American would actually publish it with back references, URLs, etc., to Stephen Greenstreet. I'm appalled at the entire mess. Scientific American really flushed themselves down the toilet with me with that. So I don't have all of the exact facts, but I will tell you that the opinion editor of Scientific American is actually a retired Air Force intelligence officer. That has been scrubbed from his LinkedIn and all those, sort of other things, but that could explain a little bit of why Scientific American is publishing this kind of garbage. Would that surprise you at all?
No, it wouldn't, but it's just horrible. I mean, if stuff comes out, just imagine what this is doing to Scientific American's reputation. Because it appears to me that people inside of Congress are not giving up.
Yeah, they definitely are not. Do you think that, and we've spoken about it quite a bit on our program, I've always felt that the debunkers, and I always say it with a caveat, there's a difference between skeptics, and it's always good to be skeptical and not believe everything that you're told, or at least to question it and look into it. There's a difference between being a skeptic and being a debunker, where a debunker such as McWest is starting from basically a result that he believes to be true and then forces the data back into it. One of the things that I've always said is there seems to be a coordinated effort amongst the debunkers. And what I mean by that is there is a cohesion in their messaging. There is what appears to be a coordination amongst these folks, and it's not only Greenstreet, it's other journalists, it's Scientific American, it's the people tweeting on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it now. To me, it feels like the whole thing is a coordinated effort, a coordinated disinformation effort. And we know in our American history that there is a long, dirty past of the CIA doing extremely dirty things on their own, unbeknownst to Congress. We know that through, I think it was Operation Mockingbird, that the CIA had employed journalists to, and this is during the Cold War period, had employed journalists to push CIA talking points. And I think it was on the order of like 200 or so journalists, editors, heads of television networks were on the CIA payroll to publish the CIA's propaganda. Now, apparently all of this stopped with, or was supposed to stop with, the Church Committee, and I think that was around 1973. Do you think that sort of thing still goes on today, an orchestrated effort by the CIA to push disinformation on the American public?
Okay, so the way I think it works now is not formal like it was back then. So they need plausible deniability. So first of all, they give press credentials to people they trust. And then the people they trust come in and listen to whatever they're spoon-fed, and they realize if they bite the hand that feeds them, their press credentials will be worthless. They will no longer get fed stories that gets their paycheck paid to them every week.
I think that completely makes sense. And especially in this instance with the AARO historical report, you had Pentagon press officer, whatever her title is, Susan Goff, doing backroom deals with journalists and news outlets that were given early access, and I would imagine it was certainly a quid pro quo on Goff's part, saying, "Look, you get access to Tim Phillips, you get early access to Tim Phillips at AARO, you get early access to the report if you play ball." Am I crazy to think that that could have occurred?
That kind of thing seems the Defense Department reporters. They get favored status. They get the briefing every day and they get fed stuff. And Susan Goff is the public affairs officer for the Joint Chiefs of Staff and SecDef, and she's just making sure she brings in people she can trust. And the thing that really frosted it for me with Kirkpatrick is when he went to Michael Hayden's center and gave his talk to a big, huge intelligence and defense audience of people who are fans of, followers, and people like me that work for Michael Hayden. Susan Goff accompanied him, and there's a photo of them coming out of the Hayden Center together. That was it for me with Kirkpatrick, because she is manipulating. She was there as a reminder.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, completely. So speaking of Sean Kirkpatrick, I thought this statement from him was interesting. This was on a broadcast called National Security Space. Let's watch.
As I've said since day one, my team and I would follow that evidence where it leads, wherever it leads, and that I would be open and objective to any hypothesis as long as the data supports it. Unfortunately, we live in a world of double standards where the reverse is not necessarily true, and people don't want to accept what evidence suggests when it is counter to belief. This report's not going to change any of those people's mind. And you can tell them apart by how loudly they cry out and how personal the attacks become, because that's usually the fallback position when there's no evidence to the contrary.
Do you think he was open to other hypotheses?
What I know for sure is if he wants to convince me, he needs to show me the evidence. He just doesn't need to claim it and say, "Trust me, bro."
Right. Well, and the other issue too is Kirkpatrick and certainly Tim Phillips now, AARO, they have not once stated what their evidentiary standards are. They have never said what. Yeah, so it is exactly that. It is a trust me, bro, I'm telling you the truth thing. So people are supposed to trust what Kirkpatrick says. It's insane.
You're not going to undo 80 years of mistrust by saying, "Trust me, bro." I'm sorry, that's just not enough. You need to tell us some details. Detail.
Yeah, exactly. So one good example of that in the report, it talks about the missile casing. So, or what they say is a missile casing. They were investigating to see whether it was some kind of metamaterial. So Kirkpatrick sends this material off to Oak Ridge National Laboratories, which is of course run by Battelle Memorial Institute, for analysis. And I guess the analysis comes back that this was quote unquote missile casing or whatever, but it goes back to that whole trust me, bro thing. So where are the peer reviewed papers? Let's say that Oak Ridge National Laboratories, Battelle Memorial Institute, which by the way, former OUSDINS head Ronald Moultrie was on their advisory board, and after we revealed that on our show, all of that stuff magically disappeared from his LinkedIn and elsewhere on the web. But so let's say that Oak Ridge, Battelle, is part of the cover-up. So Kirkpatrick, number one, he's sending the material over there for analysis. Number two, he's spending money. When he was running AARO, he's spending a large amount of money paying Oak Ridge National Laboratory and Battelle to provide AARO with with advisors from Oak Ridge National Laboratories. So how can we even trust the conclusion of the analysis of this material if A, we don't even know if we can trust Battelle, Oak Ridge National Laboratories. Two, the outfit that Kirkpatrick was giving all this money to, oh, by the way, is now employing Kirkpatrick, which is illegal. And then secondly, we have no idea, what the results are in terms of they haven't published any evidence, they haven't published any peer-reviewed papers. It's like, it again goes back to this whole trust me bro thing of AARO and Kirkpatrick. It's insane.
It makes no sense to me. I mean, just compare this to the kind of stuff we're seeing, say, in this very, very birth event, Soul Foundation papers and stuff. I mean, it's just compare the two. Compare the two, the work that the people that talk there were doing to the work Kirkpatrick has done and published. And there's no availability for anyone to review methodology or the data. If you want to convince people, especially Congress people, that you're not lying, their staffers ought to get access to all the methodology and to see the data for themselves.
Yeah, well, actually, I want to play another clip, and we'll speak about this a little bit further. Here's Sean Kirkpatrick on in that same forum.
The historical report also states, and I quote, AARO assesses that all of the named and described alleged hidden UAP reverse engineering programs provided by interviewees either do not exist, are misidentified as authentic, highly sensitive national security programs that are not related to extraterrestrial technology exploitation, or resolve to an unwarranted and disestablished program. Can you elaborate on that? And I've got a couple of follow-on questions with respect to that particular quote from the report.
Yeah, to some extent. So this is, there were a large number of programs that people named, right? So they would come in a protected environment. As the authorized disclosure authority, AARO could receive all of this information. They would tell us what they thought they knew. They would name a program. At that point, after they finished their interview, right, that information that we hold, we have to protect it as if it is real until we can find it in the DoD, IC, DOE, NASA universe of special access programs. So we have to protect it as if it is a special access program. When you go and do the research on a number of these named programs, many of them turn out to be don't exist at all. And when we say don't exist, we mean not across DoD, IC, DOE, the National Archives, the Service Archives, the Combatant Command Archives, the Intelligence Community Archives. There's nothing there for anybody out of any records. Some of them are real programs, but they're real, highly sensitive national security programs, not related to extraterrestrials, that we then have to protect and report. And that's what we've reported up to congressional leadership, right? Here's the list of programs that are being talked about that are not extraterrestrial, that you need to be concerned about, because that is a risk to programs.
Trust me, bro. I don't know how you can trust a single thing that this guy says. I truly don't.
So, if these are waived unacknowledged SAPs, I don't know how anybody went off to somebody in Congress and told them the name of a program, because that's a violation of the non-disclosure agreement. And so if Kirkpatrick said he had to treat them like they were actual programs under the normal classification guide for one of these programs, he's not allowed to talk to people about it. I don't want. So it's all befuddled. And the thing is, Grusch and others are testifying to other people now, if you believe what's coming out of Congress, of where and how to go find these things. And I can assure you it's possible for a program to have a forward-looking component and another component which is not forward-looking. So if you looked right at the surface, you would see one thing, but if you got inside, you would see something else.
And that, of course, is done on purpose.
Absolutely. People do not understand how secrecy can be so obfuscated. It's really hard to plow your way through it. And I can see how somebody with the hyper focus of a person with attention deficit disorder would be needed to plow their way through this. I'm telling you, Grusch was exactly the right person to task with this. He just got hyper focused and wouldn't let it go.
Yeah, that's, he talks about being on the spectrum as actually being his superpower. And that was why he rose so quickly, because he was able to see things that other analysts were not able to see. Now, I want to get your reaction to this. On, I think it was the last show, actually, or a couple shows ago anyway, a lot of people, well, Kirkpatrick in general has thrown shade on David Grusch that he didn't go into AARO, and really Kirkpatrick has done his best to disparage / slander David Grusch. I would say is a pretty safe way to put it. So not everyone knew why he didn't go to AARO, and I explained on our past show why he didn't go to AARO. So they wanted him to go in. Now, of course, Dave had already filed his PPD-19, his Presidential Protective Disclosure Presidential Protective Disclosure 19 is the whistleblower statute. Now, the Inspector General, we spoke about earlier about how AARO did not have 1811 authority or special agent authority to actually go and investigate, which is one of the reasons why he went to the Inspector General, because the Inspector General has all of those powers. The Inspector General can demand to be given access to these programs, and he has the enforcement mechanisms. He has the teeth to do it. So it's getting towards the end of the year, and Kirkpatrick is starting to panic that he has not been able to get Grusch in the door. It makes Kirkpatrick look completely impotent, that he has no power to do this. It completely makes Kirkpatrick look like, it just makes Kirkpatrick look like a fool. So Kirkpatrick ends up, how should I put this, enlisting an American senator to be the heavy and pressure Grusch to come in and testify. So finally, Dave says, okay, I'll do it. However, these are the security demands you being AARO have to assure are being taken care of. And essentially what Dave said to Kirkpatrick is, okay, I understand that AARO is the approved recipient of UAP-related programs, but Dave says to them, in order for me to explain how these nested UFO back engineering, reverse engineering recovery programs work, I need to tell you about 8 other special access programs that have nothing to do with UAP.
Unclassified programs. Or not special access programs, but classified. He needed to be able to talk about these, which were the cover.
Right. So what he said to AARO is, so you give me in writing, him being Sean Kirkpatrick, you give me in writing that I have written authorization to speak about these other programs, and that it is not going to constitute an unauthorized disclosure and end up with me being in jail. Kirkpatrick wouldn't do it. And one of the reasons Kirkpatrick wouldn't do it is he knew that for Kirkpatrick and AARO to get written authorization from ODNI and all of these other stakeholders, that would have had to have provided a written waiver for David Grusch to go in and speak about these unrelated programs that would be required to explain how the UFO stuff had been hidden. Kirkpatrick wouldn't do it. So of course Grusch said, you know what, if you're not going to give me written authorization to speak about these other programs, so I know I'm not going to end up in jail, I know I'm not going to end up losing my pension, Kirkpatrick refused to do it. So instead, Kirkpatrick goes on to this whole rehab tour, just saying that Grusch wouldn't go to AARO, but Kirkpatrick does not tell the whole story. He lies through omission. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. And literally, I'm going to tell you, I would be exactly the same way. I want in writing, over a signature I recognized, somebody I could look up in the national security telephone base and call on the secure phone to say, did you actually sign this document? I wouldn't go in and talk without doing that myself. I would have to check personally everything, every little detail, to make sure I was not being screwed over. I'm with Grusch. He did exactly what he should have done, because he and others believe that AARO and Kirkpatrick are whitewash.
Yeah, for sure. And I know at one point he received an email back from Kirkpatrick that just said something along the lines of, we are able to receive any information related to UAP. And Dave said, there's no way I'm going to put myself in legal jeopardy. And again, it was Kirkpatrick's trust me, bro. And
trust me, bro, but he didn't have subpoena power, so he couldn't force him.
Yeah, it's insane. I think that the picture that Sean Kirkpatrick gives to the public, and more importantly, gives to the press, is not. He's speaking in half-truths. He's, in my opinion, lying through omission, and it just blows me away that this guy even has a job at the department at Oak Ridge National Laboratory. So, anyway, moving on. So, was today Mark von Rennenkamp, who produces just amazing work on the Hill. Him, Ross Coulthart, Chris Sharp. These guys are doing the due diligence that people like Julian Barnes at the New York Times and these other sort of people that just parrot what the Pentagon tells them to do. Mark actually does the real work. So there's a great story that he put out here. The Pentagon's new historical review of UFOs picks and chooses its history. A Department of Defense report released March 8th demonstrates that a 7-decade-long trend of official obfuscation and deflection on unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP, continues unabated. Now, I've kind of gone through this story here. I've printed it out. I encourage everyone to go to the Hill and read this thing. But this was something I didn't really know about, and I'm going to kind of skim through the highlights. So he says here, in addition to critical omissions and at least one major misrepresentation, AARO's report must be scrutinized for its treatment of Captain Edward Ruppelt. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it.
Okay. Ruppelt.
So he says here, Ruppelt was the first director of Air Force's decades-long UAP analysis and later debunking effort known as Project Blue Book. Despite citing Ruppelt's more than any other individual in AARO's report, it ignores the countless cases, including many involving simultaneous radar visual observations that left Ruppelt. Am I saying that right again? Ruppelt?
Ruppelt.
Okay, Ruppelt. And the Air Force thoroughly baffled. Jumping ahead here, another July 1952 incident, according to Ruppelt, was one that even the most ardent skeptic would have difficulty explaining, although I'm sure Mick West would just say his seagulls. I've heard a lot of them try, and all of them failed. As Ruppelt describes it, a ground radar station tracked a UFO coming straight south across Saginaw Bay on Lake Huron at 625 miles an hour. Skipping a bit here, he says the analytics, in short, believe that the report in and itself was enough to prove, and the report being the detailed analysis of this incident, that this report in itself was proof enough to officially accept the fact that UFOs were interplanetary spaceships. In fact, Air Force intelligence analysts at the time, again, this 1950s, had come to the same extraordinary conclusions 4 years earlier. As Ruppelt notes, and again, reading here from Mark von Rennenkamp's story here in The Hill, as Ruppelt notes, the U.S. government's initial formal intelligence estimate of UFOs assessed that the objects were of interplanetary origin. This naturally is of significant relevance to any historical reviews. Of equal importance, Ruppelt describes an abrupt, and this is where it was interesting, and I had no idea about this, Ruppelt describes an abrupt and profound change in the intelligence analysis process for UFOs occurring in the early 1950s after Air Force Chief of Staff Hoyt Vandenberg had decided to reject the interplanetary explanation of UAPs. As Ruppelt puts it, analysts subsequently, quote, tried a new hypothesis. UFOs don't exist. In no time, they found that this was an easier way and to prove it. So in other words, Ruppelt revealed that top Pentagon officials, not unbiased evaluations, were driving analytic conclusions about UAP. At one point, according to Ruppelt, quote, everything was being evaluated on the premise that UFOs couldn't exist, which again goes back to McWest and these debunkers. This is where they start from. Mark says here, AARO's historical review largely mirrors the tone and conclusions of the anti-saucer faction, itself a product of undue interference with the analytic process. It totally makes sense. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh no, it's just I think I want to make a recommendation that people who are really, really interested in this and want to dig a little bit deeper, they need to go read about some of the early people in the 40s and 50s and 60s who were involved. And a good place to start is to read Richard Dolan's National UFOs on the National Security State, volumes 1 and 2, because he lays out what I consider to be incontrovertible evidence of the actuality of UFOs and the cover-up. I mean, and he's a meticulous historian. Everything is documented, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of real references, not a fandom wiki site. And it's just really high quality work. And then there are a bunch of others, but that's a really good place to start. So because the work that's been done before the last 2 decades had already completely proven that there was a cover-up and that UFOs actually exist. The proof has been out there for a while. And the constant refrain is show me the data and eyewitness testimony is not good. And if you just make the most conservative estimates of what these people are saying are wrong by a factor of 10, you still get ridiculously impossible physics. And now that we have radar and other things that are showing thousands of Gs, no sonic booms, turns that are impossible, like in the Nimitz incident from the radars they had, it's just ridiculous to say this stuff is prosaic. It's absolutely impossible to justify what's being said. And you notice they did not cover any of these classic cases that show something actually has gone on. They didn't cover the missile silos. They didn't cover Rendlesham. They didn't cover this case you got. They didn't cover the pilots who were sent up to go after these things, but were cross-referenced between 2 radars and then lost their lives going after them. They didn't cover the Stephenville, Texas case, which the SCU engineer who does such great work completely annihilated all the false stories with actual radar data, which he cleverly got a hold of before it could be erased. I mean, this stuff, there's just proof. You don't need to even look hard. You can go find all this stuff in all sorts of writings. that this kind of stuff is out there everywhere, and even data that is possible to refute long before 2004. And they just don't want to go before 2004 because they know how good the observers were and how good the data is.
I couldn't agree more. So like with Mick West, his latest theory, he's been arguing with Mark von Rennenkamp on the gimbal thing. His latest theory is, from how I understand it, that multiple sensor platforms failed simultaneously, or they glitched simultaneously, and that explains it all. It's just insane. And you brought up the nuclear missile incidents, and of course we're talking about the very long history of UAP tampering, disabling, and retargeting our land-based strategic nuclear deterrent.
Robert Sellis is a national hero.
Oh, absolutely. And as a matter of fact, I had debriefed. So David Schindley, who was I forgot what base he was on, but he was a retired Air Force officer, nuclear launch control officer. I spoke with him after he testified specifically, directly to Sean Kirkpatrick, and he was absolutely livid by how flippant Kirkpatrick was, what just a total shit show the whole interview was. He actually got into an argument with Kirkpatrick, and because essentially Schindley said to Kirkpatrick, look, you're never going to figure this out with the scientific method. It's not predictable. And Kirkpatrick just completely went off and was talking about wormholes. It was literally the Keystone Cops. As a matter of fact, the entire nuclear group, which Robert Hastings, who of course wrote UFOs and Nukes, Robert orchestrated sort of sending all of these folks to Kirkpatrick. So Schindley tells me that they received this email from AARO, and it was a group email sent to all of the nuclear folks. And the email basically said, we understand that you were part of a special access program. We want you to come and provide a protected disclosure. We know you're going to have to go to a SCIF, all this kind of stuff. AARO sent these guys the wrong email. These guys weren't part of SAPS. They weren't in anything like that. So they completely sent the wrong email. AARO did, Kirkpatrick did. Then Schindley emails back and says, hey, look, you sent the wrong email to all of us, and then asks the question, when is my interview? They reply to Schindley with an email saying, your email is at 5 p.m. Schindley replies, well, what time zone? The whole thing was just a disaster. And from multiple people that I spoke to that testified to AARO, number one, they just took notes. There was no recording. There was no stenographer. Schindley, in particular, offered up what the chain of command was at the time at the missile wing that he was at. They weren't interested in that. The way that, if I remember right, Schindley put it, was that Kirkpatrick and those folks, they seemed like they were just going through the motions. They didn't seem interested. They seemed like they were just doing it because Congress told them to do that. And what a slap in the face to these people.
Tell me about it. Imagine spending your working career in a silo hundreds of feet below the ground and doing this because you're a patriot and trying to protect your nation, and then weird stuff happens and you try to get people to listen so they can look at it and get slapped in the face. It's beyond awful.
It is beyond awful. And you were mentioning that the nuclear cases were not in Volume 1. So it says somewhere in Volume 1, or he might have said it in an interview, that those cases will be in Volume 2. But I can tell you from my sources that AARO is going to whitewash the nuclear incidents. They don't want to touch it. That there has been an edict that that the whole the whole nuclear incident thing, that is literally the third rail of this entire subject. The Pentagon, the Air Force, they want to gloss over the whole thing. So when they do speak about it in volume 2, from what I've told, it is going to be a joke. And like you said, what a slap in the face to these people that have held some of the nation's highest security clearances in terms of managing and having the power to launch these weapons on the president's order, but then to just be completely treated like garbage by AARO. It completely blows me away.
It's a betrayal.
Okay. Yeah, totally. Okay, moving on here. So the debrief, they came out earlier today with another article. UAP advocates rally at Senator Schumer's office in New York as efforts mobilize across 45 states. So, Bob, it seems like all of this is heating back up again. I know a lot of people were very discouraged with the stripping of the UAP disclosure amendment, but these folks aren't letting this go. This is heating up. This is going to continue. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it is, but I really want to say that I believe there's a worked out arrangement, especially between the Senate and the executive, that none of this gets dealt with until after the election. They just don't want any stuff in the way. That, and we have really serious issues. We are dealing with Ukraine and Israel and Russia and China and all sorts of other things, the border in the South. It's just one more thing that will distract people in Congress and the executive from getting the work of the American people done. I just don't believe anything is going to happen until after the election.
Do you think, and I know you're a fellow Democrat as well, do you think that there is a chance President Biden after this will disclose anything? Personally, I'm of the opinion that there, in a way, sadly, there is no incentive for any American president, be it Republican or Democrat, to open this can of worms and deal with the second and third order unintended consequences. What do you think?
I think that I know this. It won't happen until after he's elected for his second term. So after he's elected for his second term, he gets to make a decision. Now, let me tell you what I think and why I think it. UAP Disclosure Act, that was not written in a vacuum. That had to have National Security Council and presidential approval. There's just no way that language was not run by Biden's White House. So at least for a moment, he was behind it. He was for it and not against it. And then I think he said, let's not deal with this now. We got too many problems. Let's get past the election and revisit it. He could look. He has no more elections in his future after the one in November, and so he's free and clear to make a big splash. And if he's the disclosure president, he will never be forgotten in history. So I think that what they're going to want is a way to have a managed, controlled disclosure, because none of us want the institutions of the United States government that we actually rely on utterly destroyed by what was done 70 and 80 years ago. So they're just going to figure out a way to get past having to take all that dirty laundry and out it. I mean, the CIA after the Church Committee, that was almost a destroyed organization with morale, and morale did not recover until Herbert Walker Bush became the director. And I just know they don't want to go through that again. And we can't afford to destroy the CIA and the Pentagon. We need to have them stop doing what's wrong, but not destroy them, and tell the people of the United States and the world enough of the truth, and the government stop lying about it.
If Russia or China were to disclose first, what kind of damage would that do to not only America's reputation internationally, but what kind of damage would that do to America's institutions?
I don't really know the answer. I know that it would be upsetting to the American people if, the new Sputnik is UFOs. So I just think it's a mistake to let them go first. So we need a managed way to talk about this. So they can say, look, we know that we are being visited. We're working on it. We're not going to tell you anything. We're not going to tell you any falsehoods. We're also not going to tell you stuff that will harm us or which will degrade our national security. But we are going to tell you. But they've already told us that this stuff is real when they commented on the Nimitz incident, that these are actual unidentified things and they're actually in our skies. And not only that, they need to stop whitewashing history. They need to tell the truth about history. The thing that I'm sure is a constant refrain is stop telling stuff out loud that reveals to our adversaries what our weaknesses are, where we are weak. And I think they're very worried about the China and Russia figuring out that we're weak when trying to find and track down these UAPs and stop them. I mean, you just don't want to admit you can't control your airspace or the waters off your coast. It's just typical of government. They don't want to make these admissions. And what can I say? I think something needs to come out because I don't think people are giving up.
I don't think people are giving up. And the other thing that I would say as well is, the American public is, in my opinion, fairly forgiving. And the sooner they do this, the easier the path to reconciliation will be. The longer that the CIA and their dirty stuff continues to lie to Congress, hide this from Congress illegally, and hide this from the American people and the Pentagon, it is, as Lou Elizondo once said, it's like vegetables rotting in the refrigerator. It is not going to get any better. The longer that they put this off, the worse it's going to be. Yeah, and the other thing too, and you brought up an excellent point. You've got Ukraine, you've got Israel, you've got Russia, and there are clearly a lot of bad things going on that have the attention of the executive branch and certainly the legislative branch. But I think at some point you have to ask yourself, well, when is there a good time? It always seems like if I were where I'm sitting, it would seem like there always would seem to be some sort of excuse to just kick that can down the road once again. And at what point do you cry uncle and just say, you know what, it's time to rip off the Band-Aid?
I think they're going to put it off until they feel like they have absolutely no choice. And I think that there's, I've seen a triangle fly right over my house here, and if that is actually American tech, they don't want to tell our adversaries about it. I'm sure of it. So I don't know who owns that tech, but I know it's real because I've seen it with my own two eyes here twice. So it's just I saw it once in a car through the sunroof and once fly right over the house while I was on the deck. And I know that those things are real, and there will come a time when people will see that through enough evidence that it will be incontrovertible and they're going to be in trouble. I just think there is an incident probably going to happen where there's no way around it. Like, for example, a crash that's seen where one of these things runs into an airplane. That would be a big deal. I mean, there are all sorts of bad things that could happen that would force their hand. I feel it's rolling the dice and hoping it doesn't come up snake eyes every day.
That is for sure. What do you think? And this is something I'd never quite understood. I hear about different factions within the government, some that want this out, some that don't. Can you elaborate a little bit on what these factions are, what you think these factions are? Because it's something I don't quite understand myself.
Well, so let's take Hal Puthoff's talk at SALT, where he told about being called to Northern Virginia, put in a room with a lot of people, and they were told to figure out whether or not there should be disclosure. And at the end, every one of the little groups voted no. So there's this, it's worrying about the consequences of disclosure is keeping people from doing disclosure. And we just need to understand that I think there's enough coming out now that it's impossible to do that. And I know that there are people who have gone to Congress and talked to them about the stuff they know, and AARO doesn't know them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that any?
Yeah, there are people that have gone and talked to Congress. I mean, you can go listen to Weaponize, or you can listen to some of the people that tell me stuff. I just know that there are people who have gone and talked. I don't know some names, but I know that people I trust say that they've done. I do not know the individuals who've gone. I know that there have been people that have gone and told them stuff, and I'm told that by people I trust.
Yeah, and I've definitely heard the same thing. So I have some kind of veering off a little bit here. So David Smethurst, who is often on the UFO Thinker podcast, another excellent show, sent a few suggestions for questions. And one of the things he suggested that I ask you about are your thoughts on underwater bases in terms of USOs. And I don't know if you caught this on Twitter, but there is a kind of a geographic anomaly off the coast of Malibu that all of a sudden it's had a 3D representation on Google Maps, and all of a sudden it has been blurred out. What are your thoughts on whether these USOs have underwater bases? To me, it would completely make sense.
It does, because it's clear that we don't spend a lot of time down deep in the water, and if they come from a water world, they would just go into the water. I mean, we're 75% water, and it's a great place to put a base. And the reason I'm putting so much belief in it is Tim Gallaudet is having his friends work out a way to go look at that thing with unmanned submersibles. And so I think Tim Gallaudet is like one of the best things that's happened to this entire subject in a while, because he is really getting bold on his claims that this stuff is real, and we need to pay attention to it. And he has big credentials. I mean, he was an admiral.
Yeah, it's so funny. So he published the white paper regarding USOs on the Soul Foundation, and I noticed Mick West just came up with some kind of just silly reply to his stuff. But yeah, I mean, that guy, he has serious street cred. It's not
we have something in common. Both of us set sail on the USS Hampton.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we found that out at the Inquiry into Anomalous Phenomenon conference in New York, where he gave a talk.
Oh, that's fantastic. Another question David suggested I asked is one thing that, and I've read about this as well, that these things they can be detected by changes in, I guess, a gravitational field. I'm not a scientist or anything like that. Can you elaborate on that? And are there sensors, like off-the-shelf sensors that people could buy to detect whether one of these things is floating around?
Okay, so let's take some historical cases so you'll see where I'm going. There are historical cases where a UFO is above ground and energizes itself and shuts down cars, or shuts down electrical grids, or has other effects. Those kind of effects, if they are also going underwater, are detectable by a number of different instruments, magnetometers and electric field meters and accelerometers and those kind of things that measure small changes in these fields. So the answer to your question is yes, there are sensors. I don't know I'm not enough of an expert on the sensors in and around the water to know what we would have to do to remove the ambient noise sources so we get a clean signal of what we're after. It would take an expert like Tim Gallaudet working with good people to figure that out. But the sensors are capable of detecting these emissions and in these environmental ambient signals. But it would have to be packaged in a way so that we can remove the noises that are in the way of seeing the signal.
That makes sense. Yeah, I've had orbs show up at the house, and I've never known when they're going to show up. I say they, it's one. But I've been curious, like if there's something that I could get, some kind of a sensor that would go off when one of these things is outside. I have to be outside and happen to be looking at the sky when one of these things shows up. So yeah, I'd love to have something like go off on the kitchen so I know to run outside.
Well, there are two organizations. There's sky360.org and there's UFO DAP that both have cameras and other ambient sensors in their equipment that will find things that are moving through the sky. And the reason I know that the UFO DAP in particular will do it is both Chris Bledsoe's and segment on Beyond Skinwalker had one of these in it, and their equipment went off and tracked what they saw. And others out of Skinwalker Ranch have had these things, and others have gone out with one of these UFO DAP things and have found these signals. UAPX had one of those. And found things with it. So there are these sensor systems, and they are available. They are not cheap.
They are not cheap. Oh, there you go. I don't think my wife will let me buy anything like that.
No, they're $2,000+.
Okay, yeah. I can tell you she's definitely not going to let me do that. That's for sure. So if you don't mind, if you have some more time, there are quite a few audience questions I would love to throw your way.
Happy
okay.
to.
Excellent. Okay. Firstly, from Lala Bright, I think you may know her. Thank you so much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. This is from K-Psych1. Hey guys, the AARO report spoke of extraterrestrials but didn't mention interdimensional beings. Bob, what is your opinion on that? I think it's a very glaring omission.
Well, no, what they keep doing is say we have no evidence of extraterrestrials. Well, what does that mean? It means that they haven't gone out and talked to the entity and said, did you come from Aldebaran or are you from another dimension? So, I mean, the terminology they use is meant to cover up the truth.
That's surprising.
So look, okay, I'm a mathematician and I'm reasonably decent when I know differential geometry, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I've worked on higher dimensional spaces. And I've learned how to do the mathematics of physics in a higher dimensional space. My master's thesis was on that. How do you follow the time evolution of physics in a higher dimensional weird space? So if this is a sphere inside our space, that could, the things that are not in our space would be invisible to us, even though they could see all of us. So they're in a higher dimension. And as they came into ours, let's suppose it's a sphere and it's coming into our world, we would see a little point. And then slowly but surely, the sphere would grow larger and larger and larger and get about this big and then squeeze back down and go to a point and disappear. But it would still be a sphere just moving through our space, but from another dimension. And this is easy mathematics to somebody who's been exposed to it. This is just not hard to see. And to me, it kind of makes sense. And the kind of pieces of evidence that I've heard that kind of convince me something like this is real, if these incidents and these observations told to us by eyewitnesses are true. You find a craft or you're taken in a craft, you say, oh, that thing is small. How are we going to get in there? And you go through an opening and inside it's much larger inside than it appears to be outside. That is absolutely, you're moving into a higher dimensional space.
Totally makes sense. Absolutely. David Smethurst, why does Bob think senior intelligence community people and NASA people are fascinated by the beings being seen by Chris Bledsoe? They seem to recognize them and know what they are. What does Bob think?
I know for a fact what it is. They believe that Chris can help them communicate with them.
That makes sense.
I know that. I know. So I mean, look, when I first went to Chris, I proposed an experiment. And the experiment would be ironclad proof that he was in communication. Now, I don't have any proof, but suddenly and magically, they put together this experiment. They don't tell me about it or how they got it, and they pull it off. And it does this. Chris is at home, and they're off someplace at random. They have cameras pointed at the sky and other sensors. And Chris says, okay, please go show where these people are and show up for them. And the orbs and craft and other things show up right in front of the camera and ignite their sensors. And then Chris says, okay, you can leave now, and they disappear. These kinds of things are proof that Chris is in conversation with these entities. And so it's just, that's what they're after. They want information about what they are after. How do we communicate with them? Is there a way for us to interact with them? And I just, and Chris is trying to recover from over a decade of this ruining his life. And but I'm sure that they are interested in all this for all sorts of reasons. He's another data point that tells them how to interact with the phenomenon.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. I can't even imagine. I've read Chris's last book, and I can't imagine what he is.
Yeah, I'm the next. I think I'm the next to last incident in that book.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm going to have to go back and look at it again. Linda Thompson is a supporter of the show. She says, thanks. Love Linda. Love her tweets. Her tweets make me laugh a lot of times. Julie Farrell, Science Bob, if you had a chance to ask Noah anything you want, what would that be?
How many of the Geo or Leo birds have taken pictures of UFOs? Because they're pointed at Earth all the time. They've captured them.
Yeah. Oh, of course. Wildcat Mahone, thank you for the super chat. Let's see here. Narwhals Forever, another super chat. Thank you for that. Great interview. Would love to hear Science Bob's thoughts on Major General William N. McCasland. Think he would ever testify to Congress about UAP and HIs?
I don't think so, unless he were subpoenaed and forced to and told that he had to produce records and come and talk to them. And it would just be resisted by all sorts of people. Look, Tom DeLonge started To the Stars Academy, and he was trying to convince people to move things along. And so he was in contact with Podesta, and unfortunately, he was using email. And then the Russians hacked the Democratic National Committee and Hillary's emails, and these emails with Podesta were in there. And so all of a sudden, there's these emails that are spread all over the world by Wikipedia, talking about Tom DeLonge, talking to John Podesta, and mentioning William McCasland's name as the person who was the Pentagon keeper of the secrets. And it's just really unfortunate. So my guess is he would not be amenable to testifying unless forced to.
Okay, Narwhals Forever, thank you for the super chat. Mr. Grusch mentioned UAP tech having breakthrough potential for energy production. What are Bob's thoughts on science of how UAP tech might generate electricity?
Okay, so just let me give you first evidence that such a thing is there. I want people to go and watch Keith's talk about physics of UAPs out at the Seoul conference. So he does a great job of explaining. He doesn't draw pretty pictures, but he talks about it, and he gives you numbers that are conservative estimates of the energies that would be involved if these things were operating in normal space. And it's like enough power to power the United States. It's what one of these things would have to do to move from 80,000 feet to the surface of the water and stop instantaneously. And then there's no heat, no explosion, nothing, no sonic boom, anything, but anything that can hover. And you have the Teddy Roosevelt Graves. You have Graves talking about these objects hanging out in their training area, hanging there, hovering in the air. People have no idea how much energy it would take to hold a several ton craft stationary in the wind over that training area. It could consume enormous amounts of energy, and there's no evidence of this energy being consumed. And if you blow down from an orbit to the water, there's no evidence of the dumping of the heat that would be produced by any of this. So something about physics we don't understand, and this is the reason for all of these speculation throughout the last 8 decades about 0-point energy. Nobody can figure out another source for that much energy.
Okay.
And so, but the issue is, this would be one of the most disruptive things that could come out of all this. Imagine every energy company in the world closing up business in a week.
Yeah, it's an oil economy. That's the world that we live in.
Not only the mechanism that the United States uses in a reasonably benign fashion to manage bad actors and others in the world is the world operates in petro-dollars. And if petro is suddenly worth nothing, petro-dollars are not a stick you can hold over anyone. It would look, that kind of stuff will be a major disruption to our economy, at least for a while.
I never thought about it from that perspective in terms of the weaponization or the incentive of controlling energy. That's a very excellent point. Lala Bright, Lala Bright lady really seems to like you. I'll say that. All right. Pix, thank you for the super chat. Seems to me this point, the rational part of this so-called community should stop paying attention to government and begin telling the public straight truth all on our own. End the clown show. Bravo to all here.
I don't see an alternative until they decide to tell us truth. Our job, if we care about it, is just to tell what we know and how we know it and try to make rational arguments for it. And to the extent people don't want to believe us, that's their problem.
Got it. Let's see. Science and Sci asks, Matt, are you having electrical issues in your house when you encounter these orbs? No, actually, that's never happened. It's always been one orb. It's either been above the house, say around 200 feet above the house, or it's been very high up, maybe around 10,000 feet above ground level. But no, I've never had any kind of electrical interference or anything like that at least that I'm aware of. Yeah, great. Well, Science Bob, this has really been great. So what do you predict for 2024? Do you think it's going to be another newsworthy year in terms of UAP?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure of that because, the Saul Foundation is not going anywhere. And lots of these whistleblowers are going into Congress. Some of the UAP caucus seems to think they have the ear of Speaker Johnson. And if they get their committee with real subpoena power and bring people in and force them to testify, we could hear a lot of stuff. And I just don't think people are going to stop going to these elected representatives and trying to get them to act. And I think the report hurt, but it didn't deal a death blow.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm hopeful, too, that there will be a second version of this that will hopefully pass. From what I understand, it actually wasn't the what do you call it? The eminent domain thing that killed it. What happened was Speaker Mike Johnson and Mike Turner wouldn't let the bill even go up for consideration unless the enforcement mechanisms were removed. So in other words, similar to what had happened in the past with the CIA, I'm blanking on it, during the Reagan administration. What was the big?
Contra.
Say that again.
Iran-Contra,
yeah. So essentially, how I understand it, some legislation went through that said CIA don't do this, but there was no teeth on this bill, so the CIA just did it anyway. And I think we're probably going to see some of this. The other thing that I think will be important with a select committee number one, Speaker Johnson has got to approve it. But the other thing that I think the UAP caucus, Tim Burchett and others, Representative Burleson, all these folks in the UAP caucus, they have to somehow make sure that Turner's acolytes aren't stacked, that the Speaker of the House doesn't stack that committee with Mike Turner acolytes. Because if that committee is stacked with people that are going to do what Mike Turner says, then we're screwed. So
I think the right thing to make sure of that is make Grusch a staffer.
Agreed. I completely agreed. Okay, so how can folks follow your work? Where can we find you on social media, support your work? And man, I have to say, this has been a real pleasure having you on.
Oh, it's been much fun, Matt. So Bob McGuire _M4HY, that's my amateur radio call sign, is my Twitter account. Bob McGuire, spelled that weird way, will find me. And then I'm Bob McGuire on Facebook. And those two things are enough. And Lala's website is lalabrightllc.com. And you could find me on Facebook or Twitter or X almost every day.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for your time. I know this has been a long show.
May I make one recommendation?
Please.
Everyone, please go look at every single one of the Saul Foundation talks and do them more than once. That's number one. And number two, go look at Richard Dolan's recent talks about the cover-up. The last presentation, it's a typical Richard Dolan talk. It's long, but it's involved, and it has really good details.
I'm definitely going to do that for sure. The Soul Foundation, I was only there for the second day. I wasn't there for the first, but I was just absolutely blown away by it. And I was also blown away too by the gravitas that everybody was treating the subject. None of the talks were if this is a non-human intelligence or if we're being visited. It was all from the lens of this is going on. It's been going on. Let's figure out how to deal with it. It was.
I forgot one thing. So
Please.
Lala and I started our own little thing on YouTube. It's Orbis, ORBIS Paranormal. Orbis Paranormal is our YouTube channel, and we can be seen on X and Facebook and on YouTube. We've had some really good interviews.
I love that.
I'm going from Sedona with all that crazy stuff he's had throughout his life out of Bradshaw Ranch and other things. And we're going to continue to bring on UFO experiencers and others on there, and it should be interesting. So it'll be a little less science and a little more woo.
I love that. Yeah, and I've experienced the woo myself actually before the first orb showed up, and there've been around. It was either not. I don't keep a journal. I should, but it's been 9 or 10 times that this orb has shown up at the house. My wife has been witness to it. We had a family friend see it, but we also the week before the first orb showed up, we had all kinds of paranormal woo stuff, whatever you want to call it. And I think it's, as I always say, it's one thing for somebody to tell you this is real, for you to tell me this is real, or anybody. But as I'm sure you can attest, when you experience it yourself firsthand, it's a totally different ballgame.
Yeah, I just totally changed my life. I mean, don't recognize the before from the after.
Yeah.
I'm living a life now I never thought I would live.
Same here. Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us, and looking forward to having you back on the show. Please tell Dave Scott hello, and next time I'm on his show, I'll try to grow my beard out.
Thank you, Matt.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, folks. So let us know. I'm trying my best to try and put out 2 shows a week. I think we're going to keep it on Wednesday. We ran a poll on Patreon and on YouTube as well. And it seemed pretty much everyone said, if you can do a Wednesday show at 5 p.m. Pacific, that would be best. We will keep our Sunday show. We're either going to keep it at noon or keep it at 1 p.m. Pacific. A lot of our guests are from across the pond in Europe or in the UK. And of course, we love to have those guests on live as opposed to pre-taping them. And the only way for us to really do that is to have the show essentially, around lunchtime on Sunday. But if you would do it, leave a comment. Do you like having this on Wednesday at 5 p.m.? It'd be a little bit more of a challenge to do it a little bit later in the day. We're going to try and do 2 shows a week. I can't make any guarantees. Of course, I've got a day job to pay the bills and all that sort of stuff. But I'm going to do my best to continue to bring you programs and great guests such as this. So folks, if you enjoyed our show, please tell your friends about us on social media. The more people that watch, the more that we can, really kind of spread our message about this important topic to people that don't track this topic. And as we've said time and again, we really think that this is important to spread this word to people that just aren't into this stuff. We feel it's an important subject, not only to the world, to our nation, that everyone knows, that this stuff is real and it's going on, and we all should demand from our lawmakers, no matter what country you live in, we should demand that these lawmakers dig this stuff out from the Pentagon or whatever defense component of your country is keeping this hidden. We are on Twitter, as we mentioned before, at Good Trouble Show. We've been very slow to build our following there. So if any of you that are on X or Twitter, or whatever you like to call it, we would certainly appreciate your follow. So we will see you either this coming Sunday or the following. We have Peter Skafish from the Soul Foundation who will be joining us. We're just trying to book that. We also have a member of Congress that will be a future guest. We will announce that once that is solidified. And once again, we really appreciate everyone's support. And I completely think we have the best audience, and we really appreciate everyone's support, subscribing, and telling your friends about us. So anyway, that's it, and we will see you soon on the Good Trouble Show.